Color me not surprised, but it looks like Chinese hackers are continuing their penetration into U.S. systems. North Korea calls for a formal peace treaty with the United States as reunions get underway, plus the Maldives reverses an archaic death sentence. These stories are coming up next. This is the Asia Brief. Good morning, everyone. Steve Miller here on this beautiful Tuesday, October 20th, 2015. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. Let's go ahead and get started with, well, let's call it a story from the Color Me Not Surprised desk. CrowdStrike, a U.S.-based cybersecurity firm, says Chinese hackers were trying to break into U.S. technology and drug firms to steal their trade secrets the very day after a new agreement was struck between Washington and Beijing to stop such actions. This news came as largely no surprise to anyone familiar with the ongoing difficulties in this particular sector and viewed the agreement between Washington and Beijing as nothing more than words spoken at a podium, despite the arrests made in China last week. CrowdStrike said it has thwarted at least 7 attempts to break into computers used by U.S. companies since the agreement was struck, in which both sides say they wouldn't knowingly support cyber theft of corporate secrets to support domestic businesses. Responding to the report, White House spokesman Josh Earnest said Obama made it clear that the United States would judge China not on words, but on actions regarding cybersecurity. China's Foreign Ministry spokesman, Guen-hye, responded by denying the allegations, saying Beijing firmly opposed and cracks down on all forms of hacking and is the victim of such intrusions, noting it was difficult to trace the origin of cyber attacks. But CrowdStrike detailed the tools and techniques used by the attacks, and they matched up perfectly with China-based hackers. While the announcement of the arrest at the behest of the United States was a good sign that China was willing to act on its pledge, there are a plethora of hackers around. Whomever gets pinched can easily be replaced, and the cyber theft of information continues to roll on. There simply isn't much in China's interest to really reform. For years, I've mentioned that it's pointless to engage in talks with North Korea because Pyongyang and the rest of the world are on polar opposite sides of the issue when it comes to nuclear development and missile capabilities. There simply isn't a middle ground that exists to reach one another, so using the same old tired approaches are simply a waste of time. So it came as no surprise that after South Korean President Park Geun-hye and U.S. President Obama called on Kim Jong-un to scrap his nuclear program and missile program, that North Korea rejected those measures. However, what was different this time was that the DPRK formally requested peace talks with the United States. In doing so, Pyongyang declared the 6-party talks a failure. South Korea dismissed the move, noting that calls for a peace treaty were only to be made after denuclearization. Chung-In Moon, a political science professor at Yonsei University, has been an advocate for a peace treaty to be negotiated with North Korea for some time. Quote, North Korea will never give up its nuclear weapons unless their security concerns are addressed, and the best way of addressing North Korea's security concern is to have some sort of talks regarding the creation of a peace regime on the Korean peninsula. End quote. Moon went on to say that now was the time to push for talks because a new direction exists with the family reunions now underway this week and a delay in the DPRK's firing of its next long-range missile. Of course, there are several problems with Pyongyang's plan. Most notably, it wants a bilateral agreement with Washington and didn't mention either Seoul or Beijing, who are also party to the 1953 armistice agreement that ended the Korean War. Then there's also the fact that both North and South Korea laid claim to the entire peninsula. However, after 62 years, the war is over, and it's about time for peace to be recognized. Furthermore, one of the most promising pathways to unification would be through an intermediary two-state solution. While peace on North Korea's terms will never happen, the conversation may ultimately lead to the result aspired to in 2005 at the dawn of the 6-party talks. The The Maldives is known as one of the most beautiful places on Earth. It's a popular honeymoon destination for many, but also a nation where if you're convicted of participating in an extramarital affair, you may find yourself sentenced to a public flogging. However, the small island archipelago made news recently when it sentenced a woman convicted of adultery to death by stoning. Talk about archaic justice. Well, the nation's highest court stepped in and reversed that decision. The woman had been convicted of adultery on a small remote island that's had a rise in Islamic extremism. While the nation does abide by some elements of Sharia law, it also possesses some aspects of English common law. Thankfully, more level heads prevailed in this case, for even the United Nations Human Rights Council had repeatedly asked the country to end its practice of flogging women convicted of sex outside of marriage. However, it seems only international outcry will force the nation to really change. In 2013, a 15-year-old girl was convicted of premarital sex and sentenced to 100 lashes. This was despite the fact that the girl had been repeatedly raped by her own father and a 29-year-old male. Like in this case, the bad PR was enough for the government to step in and do what was right, spare the child and charge the men. The Maldives is a beautiful country on the surface, but there are significant issues that remain unresolved, like the jailing of its former president after what the United Nations called a seriously flawed trial. Well, my friends, that'll do it for me today. If you have any thoughts about any of the stories mentioned, please take a moment and share them with me. I'd love to hear from you. The Asia Brief is a special feature of the Asia News Weekly podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with your friends, and if you haven't, subscribe. Subscribing is free, and when you do, the next episode is delivered automatically to you. You can subscribe on our website, asianewsweekly.net, or in your favorite podcast application. You can also keep up with more news from the region by following Asia News Weekly on Facebook or Twitter. And if you have any comments, questions, or feedback, be sure to drop us a line. That email address is podcast@asianewsweekly.net. Thank you so much for joining me, and until next time, remember to be true to yourself and to always be awesome.